Welcome to the Office of Demonology. My name is Dr. J, retired demon hunter and knower of things, and today I'm going to review the book A Mystery of Mysteries, The Death and Life of Edgar Allan Poe.
Hey Edgar, there's a new book about you.
Now Raven, he might not be too excited. There are so many books about Edgar Allan Poe, and most of them are all about the gloomy side of Poe. So if you are happy with the caricature you have of Edgar Allan Poe, the gloomy godfather of Goth, leaning over his desk, Raven on his shoulder,
I never sat on his shoulders.
you might want to avoid this book. Now, it's a great book, but what most Poe books do, and even biographies I was looking on YouTube, they focus on his life of misery, which he had a lot of crap that happened to him. And he did write things that were masterpieces of mystery and the macabre. And we see him first as this horror writer. But that isn't how people saw him back then. First and foremost, people saw him as this tough critic. Then they saw him next as a poet. And finally, they'd see him as the master of horror and mystery. Everything's reversed now. We see it the opposite way. And Poe would be pretty upset about that. Now, all this is according to this book, which likes to take a look at this mysterious death of Poe, which is just crazy. He ends up like missing for a few days, shows up, I believe, in front of a polling place in a stupor. And he's not even wearing his clothes. He's wearing somebody else's clothes. And there's this whole mystery. How did he die? This book's great if you want to challenge all the different theories on how he died. It goes through each one and talks about that. And then peppers in stories of his life. A lot of people are saying, he was this drunk. But then there's stories where he definitely had a problem with alcohol. Let's not say he didn't. But there are a lot of tales that said it didn't take much. He could just take a sip and be drunk, basically. Didn't take much for him to end up drunk. But he has definitely experiences of being out in the public in a drunken stupor. This is the stuff we're used to hearing. And what I liked about this book is it goes and talks about the real Poe, the Poe we don't know. Hey, that rhymes. I'm a poet, and I didn't know it. The real Poe was the life of the party. He was witty, he was clever, engaging. He loved humor. He had a great sense of humor. He would be doing leapfrog on the front lawn and just cracking up. I mean, these are not things that we see when we think of Poe. We see that last photo of him just sad and depressed. And that was taken in the last part of his life. But the majority of his life, he was athletic. He actually swam for 6 miles in this channel or stream. I don't know what it was, but he swam for 6 miles. He was in the military for a bit. He definitely had an athletic build, and he was definitely healthy. It wasn't until the end where we start to see the unhealthy, sad, gloomy Poe that we all know and love. I find it fascinating if you go into stores around Halloween, there is so much Poephernalia, see what I did there, that you can buy. And again, Poe saw himself as first and foremost a poet. He'd probably be upset if he came to 2024 and walked in around Halloween and saw that all we think about is his horror stuff. Now, granted, he loved what he wrote. He knew his genius, but he felt like a writer should be able to basically tackle any genre. And so he did. So if you want to learn that Poe and also learn all the different theories of how he died and whether they're debunked or not, really there's no way to know. You'll never know. You'll never know the answer to what happened the last days of Poe. But if you're curious about the theories and whether they stand up or not, this book will definitely answer all those questions. I really enjoyed this book. The only thing that I thought, and maybe in a rereading I wouldn't be so upset about it, but there's this dual timeline narrative where we jump between the last couple months of Poe's life and then back to like earlier times. And I think the author's reasoning is we look at theories of maybe how he died, and then we'll jump back and see how he lived and if those things have any relevance to each other. It just threw me off. I like things chronologically. That might be my autism. I don't know. But it was difficult for me to be like, wait a minute, it's 1849. He's just about to die. Now we're talking about him in, the military when he was younger and swimming 6 miles. And it's like, whoa. I felt a little discombobulated. There are plenty of reasons to see why Poe was gloomy. He definitely had a lot of heartache in his life, and he definitely pulled from his real life to write stories that made us feel the way we felt when it was horror and people dying and gloom, and he had this obsession with death. There was definitely that Poe. And when you see that his mother, when he was 3, died of tuberculosis, there was another girl when he was young that died, then he had his stepmother who died. By the way, his stepmother called him Eddie. Can't even think of Edgar Allan Poe as Eddie. Maybe the Raven will start calling him Eddie instead of Edgar.
Nah, that seems wrong.
And then Virginia, who was his cousin, and yes, this is controversial, his cousin was 13 when he married her, and he was in his 20s. And she died of tuberculosis. So there's this whole consumption, tuberculosis theme going through his life. And these things show up in his stories. And you'll learn so much about that as you go through this book. I can't compare this to the myriad of Edgar Allan Poe books that are out there. What I can say is if you don't know much about Poe, this would be a very good start. Because one of the things that seems to always be up in front when somebody brings up Poe is his death. And this will give you all the answers that you want to know, whether one theory seems to work better than others. Some are completely ruled out, like rabies. That was one theory. But there's plenty of evidence that he was like drinking water and things at the end. And that isn't something you'd be able to do if you had rabies, apparently. So they kind of debunked the rabies one. So check this book out. Again, if you don't want to learn about the real Poe and want to keep the stereotype Poe in your head, I don't recommend this book, but that's silly. If you like this kind of content, hit the subscribe, the bell, and I'll be back soon with a new video.